And I think what I learned over time is that the best CEOs are just extremely authentic to themselves. I think great CEOs, they grow a lot, but they find a way and they build a team around their personality and who they are. And they try to be the best version of themselves instead of trying to emulate some other successful CEO.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have an epic episode. Henrique Dubugras, the founder and co-CEO of Brex, joins us on the show. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably been using Brex, seeing Brex on a billboard or a bus, or heard about them in an article. They've been a breakout company in the corporate credit card and spending space. Their journey from getting started as a part of Y Combinator to a multi-billion-dollar company over the past 5.5 years has been nothing short of amazing. And what a lot of people probably don't know is this Henrique is very early on in his career. So all the more impressive, just the maturity and what they've been able to accomplish at such a young age. To me, this episode was really very interesting to hear about the Brex story, how Henrique and his co-founder split up their responsibilities and really what the role of a CEO is. And I think lastly, how do you scale quickly while maintaining a high level of efficacy and quality in the work output and the product and the people that you hire and the decision makings? I mean, this is really a textbook example of that. And Henrique shares a ton of information on the inside of how to actually accomplish that. That's very tactical, which is awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree, Scott. I mean, interviewing Henrique was really inspiring for me. I mean, I look across the table here and I have another guy who is exactly my age, but running a multi-billion-dollar company, as you said. I think with Henrique, what really got me was how he broke down the importance of just being really, really honest with who you are and building a team around yourself and not chasing what you think other people believe a good CEO should be. That for me was the most powerful takeaway in this episode. And then also, you know, when you're running a big company like Brex, that has a huge brand name, raised a ton of money, it's very easy to think that everything is just going fantastic. And I think Henrique really, really walked us through how he's thinking about the current economic climate, where he's getting aggressive and where he's pulling back and why. And so just a fantastic episode. It's a pleasure to have him on the show.
Well, without further ado, let's hear from Henrique. Hey, Henrique, how's it going?
Hey, I'm good. How about you? Thanks for having me.
Well, we're excited to have you. It seems like not too long ago, I felt like I was seeing Brex billboards everywhere and trying to figure out who the heck this company was because it seemed like everywhere I looked, Brex was there. And so kudos to you on building an incredibly high growth startup. It sounds like you have a lot of lessons learned, which we're going to get into. Maybe just for the audience to have some context, for those that aren't familiar, what is Brex?
Yeah, so Brex, we do corporate cards and spend management software for businesses of all sizes, starting from startups and venture fund companies all the way to bigger companies like DoorDash and others. So we can do both corporate cards, expense management, bill pay, banking, and other products as well.
And as a Brex user, I must admit, far superior to the old Amex that I know a lot of businesses are using today. And so I think with a lot of startups, you see a company and you kind of hear the idea originally and you go, wow, does the world really need another X? Which was certainly, my initial reaction, to be honest with you, when I found out there was a credit card for startups. But clearly I did not recognize just the opportunity and value creation that you guys saw. And so what was the original impetus or insight that led you to start Brex?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the original thing that we saw was that there was all these startups who had raised millions of dollars and they couldn't get a corporate credit card. Or if they could, they had to personally guarantee it and got pretty low limits. So, you raised $5 million and you couldn't get a $30,000 limit for your credit card without personally guaranteeing it. So that's the first thing that we decided to solve. And I guess that the product market fit was very strong there because we were having customers using it before we even have a dashboard for you to see your transactions, right? Because it was just better than nothing, which is a good competitor to have early on. And over time, hopefully we became better dynamics for these customers. But early on, we were definitely serving the customers who couldn't get a card at all, and we were one of the only alternatives with actually taking very little credit risk because most of them had raised a lot of money. So it wasn't actually a lot of risk.
And I guess a company comes along and says, hey, we're going to create a credit card geared towards startups, which are, typically a higher risk asset than I think a lot of more perhaps mature companies. Like, what initial hurdles did you face actually kind of pulling this off, if any?
Yeah, I think that the biggest hurdle initially is, came from, hey, yeah, it's like you said, like 70% of startups go out of business. So how are you not going to lose all your money? And I think that the big unlock early on was this idea of underwriting customers on a daily basis instead of just underwriting them once a year, right? So what we did is we monitored people's cash in their bank accounts, and based on the progression of that, either up or down, we would adjust the limits over time. And I think that reduced the risk to very low for us while giving a great experience and a great limit to our customers. And that is something that the banks, they couldn't do, not because they never had that idea, because let's be honest here, it's not that complicated, but because the technology and the systems that they bought from third-party providers, the FISs and Fiservs and Jack Henrys of the world didn't support that. So it was really hard for them to build a technology to go from this model in which you're underwriting the customer once to this model in which you're underwriting the customer consistently, over time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and definitely sounds like a prime opportunity for disruption. So when did you guys realize that you had product market fit?
Honestly, pretty early on when we launched, we didn't even launch the product, but when we started having our first users, like the product had a lot of problems. Like there was a lot of issues. It was like wasn't accepted in a bunch of places, and it didn't really have a good dashboard for you to see your transactions. There's a lot of workflows that didn't work, but still people were using us and preferring us to their debit cards or their personal cards. So I think if your product has that many issues and people still use it early on, it's probably like a good sign of product market fit.
Yeah, no question. If they're able to overcome that friction just because the pain is so bad, you definitely are onto something. And I think one of the remarkable things about Brex is just how quickly you guys have grown. So for context, it looks like you were started more or less 5.5 years ago. Is that right?
We started around March 2017. Yeah. So that sounds, almost right.
And you mentioned 1,300 employees. And so, maybe you could give a sense of just timeline of the business, because I definitely want to talk about scale and moving quickly. So launched March of 2017. When did you guys do that? I'm guessing you raised a seed round or something. At what point did you do a Series A, Series B, and beyond, just so people have that kind of timeline?
So we started a company in March 2017. I'll give some of the notable facts of Brex. So we started in March 2017, the company. We probably had our first customer by July or August 2017. When we were still in beta, we didn't have a website. And we had raised a Series A. Our seed Series A was kind of all together around that time. And then by March 2018, we raised our Series B, before launching actually from Y Combinator. Continuity fund, because I think they saw that all these YC companies were using Brex even before we launched. So I think that was the proof point for them. Then we launched around, I think it was June or July 2018. And that was our public launch. We raised our Series C around October that year. And then we grew the company from 0 to like 100 million AR by the end December 2019. So like these first 18 months were crazy for us. And then 2020 came along, and we also launched a Brex Cash, which is our business account product, around that time, that also started doing very well. And then 2020 came, COVID hit us. we were definitely not a business that was accelerated by COVID. Let's put it like that. So it was, a little bit of a hard year, but then 2021 came back and, we raised a few more rounds and did super well. And I think probably the, most recent pivotal moment for Brex was a few months ago when we launched Empower, which is our spend management product for the mid-market and enterprise segment that we launched a few months ago.
And can you just describe what Empower does?
Yeah, totally. So basically what we realized was when we started Brex, we started signing up all these companies that, I'll give an example, like Scale AI was our first customer, right? And they signed up with us. They were 2 people. Now they're like, 700, 800 people. And as they grew, they started having all these new needs around expense management because, you start a company, you have this culture of trust that, we saw people giving Brex cards to everyone and there's no reviews, there's no approvals because everyone just trusts everyone, right? And there's not, you can just check if there's anything too high dollar amount, but otherwise seems all good. But then at some point, someone breaks that trust. I remember that moment for Brex was there was this engineer that was interviewing another engineer. And he took the other one to Alexander Steakhouse in San Francisco and bought $3,000 worth of Wagyu. And we got very upset at that. I was like, this cannot happen again. This is not the culture of financial discipline that we want to instill. And this happens across every company. Every company has a story of the first time something like this happens. And then people go and implement a process that was built for that never to happen again. But the consequence of it is that it makes it hard for the other 99% of people who are trying to do the right thing, right? So then people implement, now you need to get itemized receipts and you need to put memos on everything and you need approvals from everyone for everything. And you kill corporate cards. You say, look, honestly, only 10 people can have corporate cards. The rest are going to have to do personal reimbursements because, it's their money. So they think twice before spending, right? So you built all these different processes that are optimized for the 1% of people who are buying Wagyu at Alexander Steakhouse while making the life of the 99% worse. So that's what we realized. And we built Empower to do the exact opposite. How do we make the life of 99% people really good and make it easy and try to catch that 1%, right? And only block that 1%. And that was the thesis behind Empower. So it's a spend management platform. We can replace, Expensify or Concur or any of these softwares with a lot better software. So
that's awesome, Henrique. And, I think something you said earlier that really caught my eye is this idea of designing processes that make the lives of the 99% better while still controlling for that 1% outlier. And, in growing a company to 1,300 employees in such a short period of time, I'm sure you've done a lot of thought into how you can design effective processes that scale with the company. And so what learnings have you taken from your own product thinking as you really design these internal processes at Brex?
Actually, the thesis behind Empower came because of the way we operate internally, right? Which is we will not build processes for the 1% of cases and halt the 99%. And you can find this across many different parts of the organization. I'll give you one example, right? That is a pet peeve of mine. So how often do you see that negotiating the language on NDAs actually saves anyone anything? It's kind of rare, right, that happens. But yet everything is delayed by 2 weeks because you have to keep negotiating NDAs back and forth. And that's an example of but no one can go and say, hey, actually, we're going to say that's not okay, right? We're going to, just let people do the NDAs in a very simple and easy way. It's very hard for someone to do that, right? Because the lawyers are going to be, there's all these risks if, someone ever sues us and et cetera. And it's true, there are risks, but I think your job as a CEO is to balance, risk and speed and decide what is the kind of risk that you're willing to take in order to have that speed. And I think that the speed and of things happening is an unmeasured thing. People don't go and say, hey, okay, let me get all these other processes, right? That how much do they add up to actually executing? So we ran a survey at Brex we asked people at some point in time, how much of your time do you actually spend doing work? And how much of your time do you spend on things that are like not work? Like, like meetings that you don't deem super useful, or like, bureaucracy, expenses, like waiting out, for stuff. And it was crazy. It was like 40% of people's time at some point was spent doing like not work. And I think that's the reality of the majority of companies that scale, because you as a CEO, you don't really know what's the experience of being an employee, right? I found out a while ago that like, if we want to sign like a new vendor today, it takes 2.5 months to sign a vendor. And we're like, that's crazy. Like, why does it take 2.5 months? And there's all these different reviews. And I think very few people go and actually find these processes that take a bunch of people's time to then optimize them and like appropriately like risk mitigate and like, make risk decisions. And I think in a time like right now with the macro and everything happening and the uncertainty, in which a lot of companies are trying to do more with less, right? They're trying to, hey, we're not going to hire any additional headcounts. Some companies are saying that, or some companies are doing layoffs. How do we do more with additional people that we already have? And my big suggestion is make sure they're spending time doing what you want them to do, instead of doing time like doing bureaucracy or doing things that, maybe like, it doesn't make that much sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think conceptually you're right on. And I think the question that I have is tactically, you talked about a survey as initial starting place. Like, how do you do that? I've heard of companies having things like, internal efficiency SWAT teams. Do you put that on your functional leaders to identify these areas of opportunities? Are you and or your co-founder, looking at particular parts of the business? Because frankly, what I've observed is a lot of times you have great people that work for you, but their expectation and what they're used to might be a little bit different than yours. They might not be able to see the fact that, an NDA shouldn't take 2 weeks, but it always has. So we're going to accept that.
Yeah. So I think there's a few ways. So the first one is finding like, what is your measurement of success? There for us is this thing around like how much time you spend actually doing work, and making sure, that's progressing up over time with, by functional area. And there's like a lot of different, like each functional area has their own set of processes that a lot of the times were built for, the 1%, or that you don't even realize, right? Like, so for example, with like sales, we want very detailed competitive details on every single deal so we can make strategic decisions. And cool. Like, I would love to see that, but it's also a trade-off against people filling out a bunch of forms in Salesforce for 2 hours every day, right? So I think that's the thing. You have to create a counterbalance whenever you're building new processes, right? Like if someone wants to implement a process, how do you create a counterbalance of like, this is what we're going to get from this new process, but what is the cost? Like, how much is this actually going to take from the team's time and each individual doing this, and put it in a scale, right? And actually like thinking about that question every time you're building or rebuilding a process. And you can still decide to do it. Like with the sales one, we still want competitive analysis, and we're probably worth for us, losing some productivity time for salespeople, but at least you're making this conscious decision. It's not like, why not? Like, why not just add this amount of process in the company? And I think like, what we sell to our customers for Empower is a similar thing, is like, hey, like you don't think about expenses as a founder CEO because you have an EA, right? That's why I don't think about it. But the experience, like what is the experience of being a employee at your company, and how much time do they spend on this? And like, how much time can we, how many efficiencies can we create, after implementing this? So I would say that like, we definitely put it in the leaders, and to, instill this culture, and like instill this culture of like, hey, process is not free, right? Like, and don't build a process for the 1%, build it for the 99%. And you as leaders, you also need to, you can't overreact to incidents, right? Like obviously some incidents, you overreact. So for example, like if Brex goes offline, or if we ever screwed up someone's balances or something really bad like that, that is not acceptable, right? Like we're a financial company. We need to build process to like that happen 0 times. But there are other parts of the business in which, we may be okay taking some risk. And if you don't tell that to your leaders and to your employees that that's okay, they won't do it by themselves. So I remember like a fintech company, a big fintech company, and we were talking to their GC, and she was telling me that she got this like, this kind of like notification, that they were doing something a little bit wrong. And, they quickly fixed it and it was fine. But the CEO, instead of getting pissed that she got a notification, was like, hey, actually, like, I think that's great. It means like we're pushing the boundaries. We're not adding unnecessary bureaucracy and compliance, to our customers. So I think that's the mindset. If you don't tell it's okay to like sometimes go wrong in pro of speed, you won't get it, right?
Absolutely. The way that we got into this conversation is really the fact that we are, as you said, in a pretty unprecedented macro environment. And a lot of the listeners on this show are founders themselves, functional leaders, etc. And you have brought up this idea of risk reward a couple times in this conversation. One of the examples you're talking about here is just making sure you get more output of your people. But what are you thinking about right now, right? Like, what is most important to you in this environment? And where are you taking additional risk and where are you pulling back?
Yeah. So for us in this environment, right, I think one thing is everyone is more worried about headcount, right? So I definitely say that Brex is still hiring, but we're not hiring as much as we were going to hire before. And I think that's probably like a smart move. And we're reallocating a lot of headcount internally, right? So we're looking at like, hey, what are the projects that were kind of like longer term projects? Like, do we really need to be working on them now? Can we reprioritize with some of the core priorities? So I think like focus and prioritization is probably the first thing that we're doing. And I think companies should do is figuring out, okay, I have all these people already. Can we be more focused, right? Because also in a world where everyone is pulling back, right? Like your competitors in each area are not going as fast, right? Like there's a bunch of different things that are just different environments. So, it makes it more palatable for everyone to basically say, hey, actually, like, let's increase our focus, right? Let's focus even more. That's probably number one. Number two is kind of the thing that I'm telling you is like, hey, how can we make sure that the best people are spending most of their time working on the things that are the most important? And it's a mix between process and focus, right? So are our best engineers working in the things that are the most important, or do they get allocated to something else randomly, right? Like, are engineers spending a lot of one of the things we're increasing investment is like developer productivity, right? Like, are we building things that make our existing engineers ship more? I think these are important things that we should be doing because we have a lot of big engineering org. We need to like get more output out of it. So we're definitely focused on like getting more efficiencies while increasing the focus is probably two. But one thing we're not doing is like, we're not trying to save small dollars, in a bunch of places. So like, because I do think that at least for a company that our size it takes a lot of work and like, it doesn't get you that much. But what we do care about is having a culture of financial discipline for our employees, right? So like, it's not like we're trying you to do one less trip to New York to not see a customer that you probably should be seeing because that's important. What we're trying to get you to do is like, if you go to New York, like spend as if you were the owner of the company, right? And kind of using your own product to do that as well is an important thing for us.
That's a really insightful perspective, Enrique. And I think a question that I have, like one of the areas I always like to zone in on is not just like what founders have done to improve their business, but maybe things that they've tried that actually were not successful. And so you guys clearly have had this mantra of moving fast at scale. What are some experiments or things that you've tried that perhaps did not work out as well as you would have thought?
I would say that the biggest learning for us is how many things you can do at once in a company. Because we built Brex with like 20 people, right? So we're like, okay, so we built Brex with 20 people. So if we want to build a second product, let's just do it with another 20 people. And if you have a lot of money and you have a lot of recruiting resources, it just seems very simple. We just like, okay, I'm going to just like allocate headcount that way, and this is going to happen. And turns out it's not how it works. I think that the biggest bottleneck is this idea of, my co-founder Pedro is very good at this stuff. Honestly, a lot of what I'm saying, I'm just paraphrasing him, but he posted this on Twitter, which is like the 3 myths of headcount, which I think it's super interesting if someone wants to take a look. But like, one of the things we learned is like a lot of times things are constrained by leadership bandwidth, right? Like how much time do I have and my senior leaders in the team have to spend on that product? How much of the market, the messaging of what you do, you have to spend on that product, right? Because every time you add more products, your messaging becomes more complicated. And so I would say, like, if I could go back in Brex, I would have done less things instead of doing more things. I think that's probably like a very big learning for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess, how do you balance that with competitive dynamics? And I bring that up because, look, you guys are in a white hot space. There's massive incumbents. There's new upstarts. Everyone's claiming to be, a very multi-product type experience. I imagine there's a lot of temptation to try to do all of that in a space like yours.
Yeah, I think that the learning that we had is like the way a lot of these, our space has a ton of adjacencies, right? Like we could be doing a lot of different things, and you can find an argument why that actually would be beneficial to Brex. And I think that one of the things that we learned is sometimes like you need to let some of these adjacencies go in the short term, right? In order to focus in your core. So you need to be okay losing some part of the market in order to win your part of the market. And it's really hard to win all parts of the market at once. So we're lucky that we have a really big part of the market, and that's going to be very big. And it's not, a lot of times I think what we realize is not worth risking the focus on the one thing in order to pursue an adjacency. But again, at our stage, right? Maybe you're the size of Amazon, you can run through every single adjacency and be successful at it because you're the market leader and everything. But we still have, less than 1% market share in our market, and, the corporate credit card market, right? So there's just so much, like if you look at spend manager, like have some of the core stuff, we have like so little market share. There's so much to go there that it's okay to let some competitors win in some, adjacencies.
Makes sense. Now, one of the questions that I had for you is it looks like, you are the co-CEO of Brex, which is not something that you see all the time at a company of your scale. How do you and your co-founder balance that title? What do people need to know that are kind of starting a company and thinking about embarking on the co-CEO path?
Yeah, so our split is internal versus external. So basically, which aligns very well with our personality. So, and we've been doing this since we were 16. We started working together. So it's been our split for a long time. So I do anything external related, like, a lot of enterprise sales, fundraising, PR, big BD partnerships, just networking in general, like all these things. That's part of the CEO job. That part is all me. And then actually running the company, making sure, all this process stuff I'm talking about, figuring out what's going right and wrong, like all of that is Pedro. I would say he has a more traditional CEO job than I do. And I think the things that we come together is on product strategy, right? Because I'm talking to a lot of customers in the market, understanding everything, and he's seeing what's happening on the ground and talking to all the product leaders all the time. And I think we come together and we figure out kind of like what's the right product strategy for Brex.
That makes a ton of sense. Seems like a pretty good thing you guys worked out with each other. So hope it keeps going that way. I guess my question for you is, I'm always really intrigued by what founders learn about themselves throughout the journey. I know this is number 2 for you and your co-founders. And so I'd love to hear what you learned from the first journey at Biata.me and now Brex.
I think in the first company, we learned what product market fit feels like. So we raised $300,000 and that was the only money we raised. And our investor said, that's it. They own a lot of the company, so you can't raise more. So become profitable or die. And so we're like, okay, profitable we have to become. And I think having to become profitable in a short timeline kind of forces you to focus on only one thing, which is like, how can I get a customer to pay me this month? So I think that kind of like built a lot of intuition around for us, like what is an incremental product versus like what is something that actually, what does product market fit feel like? And which I think was very useful for Brex as well. And kind of like how does running a company very efficiently feels like. And I think that personally, I think one of the learnings, we sold a company, so we kind of felt what that was like having, in more emerging markets. Like in the US, selling a company is almost a failure. In emerging markets, like it's the biggest success ever. So we were very proud of that, and I think we felt how it was, and then we're ready for kind of like our long-term journey of building something for a long period of time. That was Brex. And I think that at Brex, probably the most important thing that we learn is about being authentic. Because I think like there's all these, when you're a founder and CEO, you look at other founders and CEOs that are successful and like, okay, like you look at Elon Musk or Bezos, and you're like, I have to be like that, right? And I have a story, me personally, like my struggle was I'm pretty ADHD and I couldn't read, like it's hard for me to read books, it's like not my favorite form of ingesting content. But then like you see all these CEOs like reading like, and my co-founder included, like 30 books a year. And I'm like, fuck, like, do I have to be like that to be a good CEO? Like, is that what grace looks like? Or I saw Elon, like understanding the physics of rockets. Like if I want to, do I have to be like that? And like, I'm so far from that, And I think what I learned over time is that the best CEOs are just extremely authentic to themselves, right? Like it's very hard to change that much your personality when you're a CEO. So I think great CEOs, they grow a lot, but they find a way and they build a team around their personality and who they are. And they try to be the best version of themselves instead of trying to emulate some other successful CEO. And the more I spend time with a lot of these CEOs, you can see how different they are in themselves. Like how different these successful people are, even among themselves. So I think embracing your quirkiness and embracing what you're good at and bad at and being extremely authentic, I think is probably something we learned at Brex that is very important for us.
Yeah, that's such an important advice. And I think, generally self-awareness is key. And that really allows you to put the people around you that will make you successful. I guess, is there any other particular personal habit or like an experience that you've had that you credit a lot of your growth as a CEO to?
I think like, look, again, it changes a lot person to person. I think one thing I would tell founders to be wary of is like, VCs, they tell you, oh, that CEO, they do that, and you're like, oh shit, like that CEO does that. Maybe I should be doing that too, I think obviously some of the best investors, they embrace this authentic thing, but a lot of them, especially if there's some struggling, they like try to find all these reasons why they're struggling. And attribute to it. So I would say like just, this process of kind of like knowing yourself and knowing your strengths and being so self-critical enough, but also authentic is very important. But then the second thing is, how do you create habits? I read this book, Atomic Habits, even though I don't like to read that much. That one was like amazing. That just talks a lot about habit forming and like how to, I used to consider myself kind of like a not super disciplined person, like I had trouble like doing the stuff that I needed to do. And I read this book, which for me, the key message is that like discipline is completely overrated. What you need to do is just make it extremely easy to get done the things you need to get done. And I think that probably changed a lot of how I look at everything in my life around, if there's things that I need to do, instead of thinking of like, how can I use all my willpower to do it, is like, how can I make it extremely easy to do it, right? And I think this is a good lesson for like in general process as well, which is like, if you make it easy to do the right thing, people will do it. It's a principle of empower actually. But I think for you as a CEO, right, is like, what are the things that you need to get done? And how to make it extremely easy for yourself to do those things? So I'm actually like, for example, there's some founders that they want to, hustle it out and like, they're like 200 people and they don't have any EA. I'm like, why are you doing this to yourself? Like it's, yes, I understand you want to like set the culture, but like what culture do you want to set that, you spend your time answering scheduling emails all the time? So I would say having that mindset of like, how do I make it easy for myself to do the things I need to get done?
Yeah, that's great advice. And James Clear is an excellent author for those that are interested in that book and some of his other content around habits. Well, Henrique, this has been an awesome conversation. We're really grateful for your time. Congrats on Empower and everything that you built at Brex. If people want to get signed up for Brex, what do they need to do?
Just go to brex.com and sign up. Easy.
All right. Amazing. Well, thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you on the next show.